Hi everyone, my name is Kyle. I'm a pop culture scholar who has recently rejoined the hobby of action figure collecting, and I've been especially interested in the NECA Universal Monsters line. That's the set that brought me back into collecting. And it's a rainy day here today that got me thinking about Universal Monsters and horror movies, and I thought I would go ahead and make the next video in my series of reviews for the NECA Universal Monsters. I'm calling these kitchen table reviews because it's just sort of an unboxing and playing with the figures here in my kitchen, and I'm talking you through, as someone who has recently come back to this hobby, what works for me and what I think I am getting for my money when I buy these figures. So I'm going to evaluate the next figure according to the same 5 criteria that I've been using for other reviews: packaging, sculpt, articulation, accessories, and pricing. Okay, the figure that I want to talk about is Ultimate Frankenstein, or Frankenstein's monster here. And just like with other reviews, I wanted to start by talking through some of the packaging. This is pretty typical packaging, similar to other Ultimate NECA Universal Monsters. We've got the movie poster on the front cover. I love that. So this corresponds also with the DVD that I have for the movie. And I love that we get that sort of sense of nostalgia and retro aspect of the figure. As with other figures, we get some credits on the bottom, and the sides show us the various poses that the figure might come in, including some extra poses on the back here that might inspire some ways to sort of showcase the character. The box is, as with the other figures, perfect for display on movie shelves or bookshelves. I think that's pretty great. And then there is a window opening up to the inside so that you can see the figure, and also a main pose for the figure. And in general, I think that this works really well. The packaging is pretty cool. The poses or pictures that we have on the sides and on the back are pretty dark, so they are sort of difficult to see compared to some of the other monster figures and their packaging. I know that we want a little bit of darkness here because these movies are based on black and white films, or these figures are based on black and white film characters, and of course it's horror, so you want a little bit of darkness, but you want enough light and exposure to actually be able to see what's going on with the poses here without having to squint too hard. Although I do like this, there's some cool uses of little squares here to showcase the extra poses. So this is a unique way of showcasing the poses on this specific figure's box. And I think that it looks a little bit like they're creating film stills for us. So it's pretty neat. I really like being able to have those squares that come with some of the pictures for us. On the interior, the packaging works pretty well also. So you have the standard plastic back for this figure, and then you have the little slats that help to hold in accessories, and we'll talk more about the accessories in just a moment. Overall, packaging is pretty good. I have some little complaints here and there, but I'm going to give the packaging a 4 out of 5. Let's go ahead and talk about the sculpt. Okay, we're going to go ahead and slide the monster out of the packaging here. You've got some flaps holding the figure in, and you can just reach in with your fingers and pull through. So I'm going to flip this over and pull out the plastic interior. So you can see that we have the character, and once again, you have the standard plastic holder for the box, and then you have some plastic slats that hold down the accessories so that they don't fall out on the sides. These plastic holders can be a little bit breakable. You can see here where I've had to put in some hot glue to keep it together a bit. But Frankie does fit in here pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and pull him out. And it's a great looking figure. Let's talk more about the sculpt. All right, I think Frankie looks great. The figure looks really imposing. It has a very broad frame, and so you put it next to other NECA Universal monsters, he just looks big. And it's not because the figure is all that much larger than the other figures in terms of height or whatever, but it's just a bulky frame that they've given to the figure. So I like that it looks sort of intimidating, right? Because this character was supposed to be big. There's a lot of cool details here. So if we get just a little bit closer, you can maybe see some of the details of like the wrinkles on the jacket and the pants. We have cool things like veins in the hands that you can see and in the arms. On the head, we have these cool stitches and bolts that are available, right? So all of the things that you would hope for in terms of creating a likeness to the movie character, I think is great. And the details in the face are particularly good. I am often a little unimpressed by the ways that action figures try to replicate particular actors when they're based on live action performances. But I think this figure actually does a really good job capturing Karloff's likeness. The jacket is also pretty cool. There's a rubbery material here on the jacket. And I think this has pros and cons. The pro here is that the arms are actually separated from the jacket. So it looks like he's still wearing the jacket here, but the arm is actually its own thing. There's no rubber jacket piece coming over it. It's just sculpted to look like a jacket. And that increases the mobility of the figure and the articulation, which we're going to talk more about shortly. So that works really well. The downside, of course, is that the jacket doesn't actually come off, which is not a huge deal because that's not really something that we saw in the movie or whatever, but it might be cool just to have some additional pieces, and that way it counts as an accessory instead of just being a part of the figure. Overall, the sculpt is really good. It's a really impressive looking character, really accurate to the source material. I would give the sculpt a 4.5 out of 5. Let's move on to go ahead and talk about the articulation. All right, let's talk articulation. So here I'm giving you all kind of a prima donna pose, something that the character never did in the movie, but still this hopefully shows off a bit of articulation. You can stand and pose this character still with bending the knees, even though the character in the movie mostly walked with his knees sort of straight. You can see that the arm comes up over the head pretty easily. It reaches straight up on this side here, and then on this side I'm showcasing that the arm can go wide. It stretches out away from the body instead of having to stay close. So those points of articulation work pretty well. You can also keep them very close together or very straight if you want to, because of course that's a lot of Boris Karloff's character work in the movies. So that's a good way to sort of capture the likeness of what's going on in the film. Again, the arms are not actually bound by this rubber jacket piece. So because the jacket is sculpted on, that means a lot more movement than we would get if we had a rubber jacket. And something that's really great here is that I'm going to go ahead and pop off the headpiece for a moment and show you that it's not just a plank with a ball joint on the end for this figure, but the ball joint is double-sided, which means you can move it around. And when the head snaps on, any of the heads that we have, okay, so we heard the snap there, head is securely in place, not only do we get the standard, lowering of the head, which looks a little intimidating, or the inquisitive to the side, but this character can lean back a lot more and the head rotates up a lot more easily than some of the other NECA figures. So I really like the rotation that we get on the head so that we can give a full range of expressiveness, especially given the other accessory pieces. The feet of the figure are likewise great. I don't usually pay all that much attention to the feet of characters or figures, except for in the case of Frankenstein's monster, Karloff famously wore gigantic shoes in order to help make the character seem larger and more imposing. And in the case of action figures, whatever you have for the figures to stand on is going to sort of determine how much balance they have and their ability to stand up, especially without the help of other equipment, right? So this allows them to be freestanding figures. Frankie has a lot of possibility for being able to stand freely, but there is a challenge sometimes that these big shoes don't move around all that much. Just like in the film, he's a little bit flat-footed. So that means if we try to get too wild with our stances, it's going to be harder and harder. I can barely make Frankie stand a little bit this way, but you can see that this foot is leaning on its side and it's going to be a whole lot more vulnerable to being knocked over. So that's not a huge drawback, but just something to think about, that there are specific poses that work really well based on the grounding of the figure with the feet, and then there are others that are a little more challenging. But maybe that will give y'all some opportunity to express creativity like it has for me. I think the articulation overall works really well for this figure. NECA found a number of ways to get around what could have been difficulties with, say, the arms and the neck. So I'm really excited about that, and I give articulation a 4 out of 5. Next, we're going to talk about accessories. One of the best things about NECA figures is almost always the accessories. So with Frankenstein's monster, we have a couple of additional head sculpts, and then we have some props. We're gonna pop off these little plastic containers. You see that we have some chains and cuffs, and these can easily fit around the monster's hands. And we also have some daisies, no doubt in reference to some of those really sad moments in the movie as we get toward the end. So there are actually, we have this cluster of 2 daisies, and then there's a third set of, there's a third daisy as well. In addition to that, we have some extra hand sculpts in addition to the regular hands that we've already looked at on the figure. We have a set of hands where the fingers are a little more pointed out, and there's an opening here to be able to hold props like the daisies. And then there is what's actually my favorite of the accessory hand props here. We've got the hands that are outreached, what I'm calling the strangulation hands. They're the ones that look really scary and imposing when you place them on the end of the figure there. So they make Frankie look a little bit more scary, and I really like that particular accessory. In addition to the hands and the props, we also have the various head sculpts. So you've already seen this one. This is the neutral face that we typically see from Boris Karloff. We also have this thing that's going to be more of an inquisitive face. And this does seem to line up with some key moments in the movie. It's a good sculpt to have, although I maybe would have liked to see something in terms of a more joyful face as well. given that we otherwise only have neutral and this kind of enraged face here. I do really like this particular head sculpt. So the enraged face is probably one of the most famous expressions in the movie, and I think that works really well. Between these different head sculpts, we do have really good coverage of the big movie moments, and I think that works pretty well. I like some of the hand sculpts, and I do like having the chains. They're a very famous part of the movie. The daisies are also famous, although they're not particularly inventive or visually striking for figure photography, if that's what someone is using this for. They're more difficult to notice if you're just displaying the figures or things like that. But it still connects well with the film, and overall I think the props are pretty good indicators of references to the overall film. So I'm going to go ahead and give the accessories a 4 out of 5. And finally, we are going to talk about pricing for the figure. Okay, so pricing for the figure. This comes in at about $35, as a lot of the other figures do. And I think that's pretty fair for this particular figure, even though the props are just a little bit sparse, sort of like with the creature from the Black Lagoon that I mentioned in my last review. It's still a lot of work on the sculpt. We do have at least some props that make for clear references to action of the film with this particular figure. And the figure itself moves really well. It looks really good. It has a lot of posability. So I think as far as bang for our buck, the $35 is going a lot further with this figure than it is with some of the other NECA figures that I have talked about on the channel so far. For pricing, I'm going to give this a 4.5 out of 5. And that means that altogether, what Frankenstein's monster ends up scoring comes out to about an 86% or a B+. I'd say that's about right for this character and this particular figure. So Frankenstein's monster, classic figure, classic character, and the figure can meet all of the major poses for the famous scenes in the movie. We have some helpful props that will allow us to reimagine some of those scenes from the film, and I think the figure is overall a really good buy. So a B+ is what I want to give it. I had some small complaints about packaging and accessories, but overall those aren't a huge deal, and I think this is a great figure to have in one's collection, especially if you are fans of classic horror or monster films. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my reaction to the NECA black and white ultimate Frankenstein's monster figure, and I'll have more figure reviews ready to go for you very soon.